evening, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting of the middle school open session of the Roselle Park Board of Education held under the Open Public Meetings Act of the State of New Jersey. Notice of this meeting is sent to Star Record, local source, the home news review, for school offices and district website. The purposes of this meeting is to gather information from residents in preparation of the 2014-2015 Board of Election Board of Education budget. No action will be taken. Roll call, Madam Secretary, please.
President Miller.
Here.
Vice President Sokol. Mr. Balaban. Mr. Bruckenstein. Mr. Dan. Mr. Gerton.
Here.
Mr. Harm.
Here.
Mr. Nelson.
Here.
Mr. Reed.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Fantastic. Please stand for the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you everybody for coming to our second open budget workshop meeting. Unfortunately, Mr. Dan, the chair of our finance committee, is under the weather, couldn't make it tonight. We wish him well, as we do also Mr. Bruckenstein. And I'd like to turn it over to our finance committee member, which is Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson, for your safety rules, please.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Welcome, everyone. Thankfully, you came out tonight for our second budget meeting. Also on the committee is Mr. So myself, Mr. Harms, and Mr. Dan, working with Mr. Riccio and Mr. Ferrito to try to come up with this budget we're presenting this evening, and we're hoping that a chance to just look through it and have plenty of questions for us. But this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Riccio to begin her presentation.
Thank you very much. This presentation this evening is going to be extremely similar to the presentation given on April 1st. So those of you who are in attendance, if you would just bear with me, just in case there are some new questions, concerns that you would like to bring to tonight's meeting. The agenda will pretty much follow exactly the same. We're first going to discuss the budget timeline, then look at one portion of the budget known as the expenditure side, followed by the matching revenue portion of the budget. We feel that it's very imperative to take a look at what's been happening in the state of New Jersey the last 10 or so years with state aid. And then, of course, one thing that's in everyone's mind, those of us who do live in Roselle Park, and myself included, would be the impact that this particular school budget will have on our taxes for the 2014-15 school year. We will then continue with pros and cons as to what good things will happen with this budget going forward, along with things that we would not be able to do if the budget is not passed as we are going to look at tonight. And then some ideas that the board and the superintendent have for future planning and how we're going to continue to meet with the very challenging concept of providing a viable school budget year after year. There has been a drastic change to school budget's timeline in the last 2 years due to some very important change in legislation. First of all, we all know that school districts, for the most part, no longer vote on school budgets during the month of April, but now have the option instead of moving their elections to November. And in doing so, you will work to stay within the 2% cap levy with the few allowable adjustments. And then there is no need for the budget to go to vote. Of the over 500 school districts in the state of New Jersey, overwhelming majority has opted for that change and now have their elections in November, just like Roselle Park. There is approximately only 25 school districts in the entire state of New Jersey that still hold their elections in April and vote on their budgets. More recently, this year in January, there was some additional legislation that passed as a result of that, which gave school districts some additional time to work on their budgets. For example, last year, Governor Christie gave his State of the Union address, and state aid figures came available on February 28th, and within a month time, we proposed our tentative budget, had our budget workshops, and actually adopted our final budget by the end of March. Now, we're all well aware of the fact that today is April 22nd, and we're nowhere near that. And that's because of this additional time that has been allowed for school districts to work with their communities on the budget. So state aid figures were once again released very similar timeline, February 27th. Our Finance Committee has been meeting throughout the months of January and February. And back on March 18th at our board meeting, we adopted our tentative budget. The budget documents were then forwarded to the county office for their perusal and hopefully approval. And sure enough, about a week ago, we did receive from the county office approval on our budget. We are continuing now with further budget workshops. Our formal public hearing, which all school districts must have between April 24th and May 7th. Roselle Park will be having their formal public hearing at next Tuesday's meeting, April 29th. After this workshop and the public hearing, with input from the community, a decision will be made to move forward with what will be our final budget, which will be approved at the May 6th board meeting. So we will meet the deadline for our public hearing and adopting the budget. So that does give us a few more weeks to continue working with the community, with the board, to come to a decision as to our final budget. If we feel there's a need to make amendments, we do still have time to go to the county office to ask permission to make changes. If you look with me next at the pie graph, which illustrates the school budget's expenditure side, it illustrates quite nicely the large portions of our budget that are comprised of the salaries of all of our employees, health send students to special needs schools, and also to send students to the Union County Vocational Management School System. All the other components of the budget are much, much smaller amounts, and in fact, if you look at just those first three components, salaries, health, dental benefits, and tuition, that comprises 83% of the budget. So there's very little leeway as to items that we have control over that would have much of an impact on our expenditures. The next slide gives more detail of the actual expenditures. Here you see 4 years going back to 11, 12, 12, 13, 13, 14, and what we're proposing for 14, 15 for comparison. And we selected the categories, of course, that are the largest portions of our budget. You will see that certain items keep going up pretty largely. Things like salaries, health and dental benefits. Again, two things that are part of the contracts that we have with our staff, and of course providing them what is required by that contract for health and dental benefits. Some of the items in this list remain pretty consistent. We try the best we can to keep spending at a minimum. And you'll actually find a few items in the list that have decreased over time. We do make efforts to control costs, put things into effect to maintain some savings. You'll see that utilities has decreased over the years. If you recall, a few years back, we put in some solar panels on the roofs of several of our school buildings, and they have been saving us some costs with electricity over the years. We've made some changes with special ed. We've been providing more services in-house rather than spending money on outside contracted services. We find that we get more hours of service if we employ people rather than hire outside services to do that for us. One other area that has increased is transportation. Transportation has increased because we had a need to add one whole additional bus to our bus route every morning that takes Roselle Park students over to the Scotch Plains campus for the vocational magnet schools. And also we have more students going out of the district. And again, with this slide, just pointing out a few things that I just mentioned. The things that have increased are the salaries because of our collective bargaining agreements with the staff. Our health and dental insurance has been proposed to require a 15% increase. Originally, the increase we were given was 20%. Our broker is still working to try to bring that down. They brought it down to 15% so far. We're still in negotiations. Mr. Garrido and I are going to be meeting with another health insurance company later this week. We're trying to get some better prices and hoping that this will help us with competitive pricing. So hopefully in the near future we will be able to give you some more concrete news with that cause. Again, the tuition has increased because of and that's over 50 years old. So we do have a few things that we need to do. And if you don't take care of them, they only grow into bigger, more costly problems. So we did put a little extra money, approximately $15,000 per building for some additional repair work. The one other item that has increased on this list is our lease purchase costs, and that's because we're looking to do an additional lease purchase. So there's an increase of $150,000 there, which is like a loan payment, because a lease purchase is similar to a loan, a 5-year loan, where we pay back a certain amount of money. And with this particular lease purchase, we're looking to provide at least 300 new computers for our elementary and middle school building. We're looking to purchase new literacy textbooks in grades K through 8 for our new literacy drive. We have a need to replace a boiler at Sherman School, which is totally inoperable, and it's not good to not have a backup boiler just in case. We're looking to purchase some classroom furniture for the new kindergarten classrooms. And we're also looking to finally work with the Friends of Roselle Park to complete the auditorium renovation at the high school that they've been working very hard on for the last few years, trying to raise money. So we're going to be partnering with them to finally replace the seating, replace the flooring, and possibly do some other small renovations inside that high school auditorium. On the revenue side, of course, expenditures and revenues always have to match. So in order to fulfill that part of the budget, we have to have a similar amount of revenue. Bad news with revenue is that not much is increasing. State aid has pretty much remained identical, with a tiny, small adjustment, and that's what's known as the Park Readiness Aid and the Per Pupil Growth Aid. You may have read in the newspaper that Governor Christie did give additional state aid. Well, the additional state aid that he gave was a total of $20 per student in our daily enrollment figure, which amounts to $37,240 for Roselle Park. Other than that, the state aid had no increase. Our other revenue sources are relatively minor. Tuition that is paid from other schools that send their students to Roselle Park. Some parents do pay tuition to send their children to the Early Childhood Center. And then some small miscellaneous revenue, things like athletic aid, receipts, etc. So therefore, the one revenue figure that has to go up in order to obtain the appropriate total budget is the tax levy. And we are allowed to do that this year with the 2% cap increase, an allowable adjustment for enrollment, which amounts to $45,875, an adjustment that is allowed to us because of our increase in health benefits costs, and finally, an adjustment, what's known as banked cap. There were several years in the past where we were fortunate enough to be able to provide the town a 0% tax increase. And because we were able to do that several years, the amount of increase that we didn't use at that time goes into what's known as a bend. And you have a certain amount of years where you are allowed to go back and use that amount of money. So we are going to request that we use some of that in this particular budget. You will find, if you talk to people throughout the county, that most school districts, not only the county but the state of New Jersey, are in the same exact situation. Pedro, the superintendent, and I polled all of Union County, and there are 10 other school districts that will also be using band cap in their school budget, and there are only 5 school districts that reported that they were not using band cap. So again, it's a situation that does not just apply to us, but to most school districts around the state. The next graph illustrates what's been happening to state aid in the state of New Jersey. And this graph shows 12 years. You will notice that the tallest bar in that graph was back in the year 2009-2010. We were given the largest amount of state aid, and that's when Corzine was governor. The following year, when Governor Christie came into office, state aid took a drastic drop. For Roselle Park, it was a drop of $1.4 million we lost in state aid, and that was the time when Roselle Park School District had no choice but to cut a number of jobs. And I believe it amounted to 35 and a half jobs that were lost in the district. A number of teachers and paraprofessionals. State aid has been climbing up a little bit, but even next year's figure still does not match the figure back in 2009, 2010. So we're not even back to that particular level yet. The next slide just compares a couple of important figures. Now, these do not add up. If you go across horizontally, they're not supposed to add up. I just selected 3 important figures that I thought would be nice to look at. The total budget is the column on the right. The column in the center is the tax levy in Roselle Park for the school budget. And the far left is the column, the state aid that we received. Notice during these 12 years, state aid increased by only $2.7 million. The tax levy did increase by $5.9 million, but yet our total budget has increased by $10.8 million. So we've been working like the devil to make our dollars work for us so that each of those columns would not be the same. In particular, if our budget went up by $10.8 million, it's nice to know that our tax levy did not go up by the same amount. So we the state, for the town of Roselle Park. And that means all of the tax levy that is possible. And unfortunately, in Roselle Park, this rateable figure has been decreasing the last 8 years. If that figure was increasing, that would help us as taxpayers, and that would mean we would have a smaller burden as a homeowner. But unfortunately, the opposite direction causes just the reverse to happen. The impact on the homeowner then becomes even greater. You look at this chart, you will find that the majority of homeowners, with the results of this budget, would have an increase of taxes for the year, somewhere between $200 and $300 for the entire year. Now, depending upon your assessed value, hopefully you all recall that it's listed on that little green card that you get every year from Borough Hall. And of course, our assessed values are nowhere what the real market value is, so don't be alarmed by that figure. You will find those figures at the far left. So probably most homeowners will get an increase somewhere around $200, $250 per year with this particular budget. At this particular point in time, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Mr. Garrido, and when we're done, of course, we will be open for questions and comments.
Thank you, Mrs. Garcia. Thank you, everyone, for coming over and listening to this presentation. And thank you to the Finance Committee as well for their hard work on preparing this budget. A budget is never easy. The board has to be responsible to the community. However, we need to keep in mind one thing. What's in the best interest of our children and the students come to the school district? And that's what drives a budget. You heard many numbers, language that could be confusing at times and so forth. But what does it all add to? Well, I want you to keep in mind 2 slides, and actually 3 things. The first slide is the pie that we saw at the beginning, where all the budget goes to. It leaves very little in terms of funding for programs and funding for actual education. And I want you to also remember the slide, the bar graph, where we received the state aid. It has stayed flat the past 3 years. The costs have gone up. Transportation, out-of-district education has gone up. The state aid has remained flat. In addition to that, the third thing that I want you to remember is the state of New Jersey is mandating more and more unfunded types of program. Testing, that is unfunded. We have to purchase technology computers for the park test because they say that we have to take it now on a computer. They're not giving us any additional funding for that. The anti-bullying or the HIV mandates, they are unfunded. Many districts are scrambling because there are so many incidents and they don't have enough social workers or enough guidance counselors to keep up with it. Again, unfunded. So we have to keep that in mind. What does it all mean here? What does all those numbers mean? Well, as you heard from Mrs. Gershio, we do need to go into what is called banking. If not, we would not be able to continue providing the level of education that we are right now. Do we want to provide a better education? Absolutely right. However, the budget dictates what we can do here. If the board approves this budget, as you heard Mrs. Gershio, we can maintain the current programs that we have now. But we have many good programs. Many districts are cutting out arts, music. They're cutting out those after-school programs or before-school programs because they need to come up with a budget to make sure that we can give the instruction that we need to give for all these state mandates. Class sizes. One of the top items or factors, one of the top factors that contribute to a good education is small class size. That is research that has been proven to be true. Students or classes that have less students, they perform better. The results of approving this budget means that we can maintain. Some of the class sizes, I wish to see them even smaller. But we're not at 30 or 35 students. Some districts are moving and inching up to 30 and 35. We're in the low 20s, some of our grade levels, maybe even lower than that. I'm afraid that if this budget is not approved, we may need to cut staff, we may need to combine classes, which means one thing, larger class sizes. We know that, and you know that I've been a big proponent of full-day kindergarten. And this is something that, without the approval of this budget, we would not have. 120 students of kindergarten age are receiving or getting a gift of full-day kindergarten, an additional 500 hours a year of education. That goes a long way. We have a test that is called PARC that is mandated for next year. We need to make sure that we have the technology in place to make sure that we can have these PARC. Not only that, we know, and again, it is proven that if technology is used correctly, it drives instruction. So we want to make sure that the students are equipped and they are prepared for 21st century learning. We have a high school auditorium I just visited that is falling apart. That is when they have the musical, the plays, and so forth. It's falling apart. It needs to be renovated. We're looking to do that with the approval of this budget. We have a boiler in one of the elementary schools that's 100 years old. Yes, every building has 2 boilers. However, you know what can happen if that one boiler falls and fails is going to happen when it's 10 degrees minus 0 and we need it. Then what are we doing? We need to get that new boiler. We are right now, we have a new initiative for language arts going from K through 8, a balanced literacy initiative. It is research-based, it is best practice, and we need to purchase literacy books. With the approval of this budget, we'll be able to do that. Children are learning to read and write different than they were even 5-10 years ago. Smaller groups called guided reading. So we need to provide that type of education for our children. They deserve it. And classroom furniture. Some of the furniture is aging. As a matter of fact, I visited a couple of current kindergarten classes. If we want to have a kindergarten class that children get the best out of their education, they go to what is called centers. We need to provide them with better furniture. We need to provide them with a classroom that they will be self-engaged in the lessons. It is just, again, research-based. This is a result of the approval of the budget. Again, the state is not giving us any more funding. It's not giving us any more funding. And you just saw the last chart, just show. And again, nobody wants the taxes going up. I know I don't. And I know you don't. But we need to think of our children's education. We need to do that. These are the pros of the budget being approved. What happens if this is approval? Well, if you have a pro, you have a con. It's completely the opposite. We need to cut the programs. The WISE program that helps the students do better in tests, we will need to cut that. We will need to cut it right away. Those extra programs that are being used to reach those students that are maybe a little bit behind, we will need to cut those programs. We need to reduce staff, possibly one per grade level. Why? Because if you look at that pie, most of the funding comes from salaries and benefits. We will have to make up that gap. We will have to cut staff. We don't want to do that. It will increase class sizes. Support staff will be cut. And if class sizes are bigger and we don't have support staff, I can tell you right now, from experience, that half of the class will not get the level of education that they deserve. Guaranteed. Obviously, no full day kindergarten, no new computers, no literacy textbooks. We will continue with our reading program that is already outdated. We use a book that is about 10, 12 years old. So they're outdated, as no new boiler, and obviously no new furniture. So that would be the impact of the budget that is not approved by the board. Well, you heard the pros and cons. Next year, we may be looking at a similar situation, maybe even the years to come. So we have to be proactive. It doesn't look like Governor Christie is going to give us additional funding. It doesn't look at the state. It's saying, you know what, we need an extra $2 million to run the program. Here, take it. They haven't done it in the past, they're not going to do it now. So we need to be a little bit more creative. We need to plan for the future. How are we doing that? Well, one of the things that we started looking at, the board and myself, and I know there's a member of the community here that's also brought it up, okay, look into grant writing. There would be an initial cost in hiring a grant writer, but in the long run, we may be able to get additional funding for early education, for extra programs, for science, for the STEM programs, for music, for art, and things such as that. And we want to look at those things because we do not want to lose on that. So we're looking at that. We're looking very seriously on a grant writer. As a matter of fact, I know we have one coming at the May 6th meeting, and they're going to make a presentation. We're trying to look at the others. I made a couple of phone calls. One actually is another local, so we'll take a look. We're going to investigate other facilities for expansion. You may be thinking to yourself, expansion? But looking at a budget that we may need to cut. Why are we expanding? Well, when we expand, we may be able to roll out the same money. Why? Two of the areas that continues to increase, okay, the costs continue to go up, is tuition for our district students and transportation. If we're able to find additional space, we may be able to cut both of those areas for savings that we may be able to use for other things. So we're exploring. We visited, Mrs. Gershon, myself, and I know Mr. Harms, we visited one of the facilities. We may have to continue to explore and see what's out there. But maybe, we may be able to look into that. The next thing is bring back out of district students. Well, that's the result of number 2. Reduce transportation costs. Once again, the result of number 2. And it's explore more efficient uses of facilities. Okay? We may have to start thinking about a 5-10-year long-term facility plan. Many districts are doing it. Our buildings are getting older. They're over 100 years old. We're going to have to repair them every year. that 5, 10 years from now, we may need to do major repairs. So we may need to start looking at how we use our facilities a little bit more efficient. Okay? So these are some of the things that we're starting to explore. So 5 years from now, when we come here and say, you know what, we don't need to go out and use the bank account. We have been more efficient, we have been using some of these things, we have been exploring, we have been proactive in terms of the cost, and we have a plan in place. And that is what we want to do. Because we want to provide the best education possible for a student. With 21st century learning has changed the way children learn quite a bit. There's a lot of best practices out there, a lot of research-based programs. We want to make sure that we can be one of the districts that we can bring those programs in. And that is my responsibility. And I explained to the board, I spoke to the board right from the beginning, that that's what I want to do here. Make sure that our students get the best education that they deserve. So we're looking at a budget this year, if the board approves it, and I am getting very positive, obviously, about educating our children. That's why they're sitting up there. We want to make sure that next year, the years to come, we are able to explore the options. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank Mrs. Gershon once again for her detailed and in-depth presentation. And I want to thank the Finance Committee and the board for the time to put a budget together that will help our children in the future. And now I'll move to this, take any questions, comments, whatever. Thank you.
I just have a couple of questions. With regard to, it's more just because I just like full comparisons. For the expenses, you showed for the year from 11, 12 to 14, 15. But for revenues, you just showed 2 years. Is that okay? Those other 2 years. For expenses, you have 4 years. Thank you. Is it known how much the auditorium renovation is being budgeted for? If you're not willing to say it's fine, I'm sure there is a number.
What's the auditorium?
Of the auditorium.
What do you use that?
No, what is the budgeted amount?
What is the amount?
Yes, it's purchased.
The budgeted amount for the auditorium would fall into the lease purchase payment. What we are going to attempt to do is get a 5-year loan for a total of $750,000. With that $750,000,
No, right. The $750,000 isn't the auditorium.
No.
It's for everything. Of which the auditorium is a part.
right,
That's part of that one.
it's part of that.
What am I saying? That's a quick number.
No.
Well, I was going to continue and say that of the $750,000, approximately $160,000 will be used towards the renovation project,
So it
along
just,
with the funds raised by the Friends of Roselle Park will also be contributing to the total cost.
And do we know how much that is?
The Friends of
Yes.
Roselle Park, I believe, 50 or 60,000.
I thought it was 60.
60.
I think it's more like 60.
Yeah.
So,
All right, check. It's 100. With regard to, this is just a question in line with Mr. Carino's looking towards the future. When does the RPPA negotiations begin? When is the next?
The next negotiations, probably in the fall.
So it's next year. It's next year.
Next year is the third final year of the existing contract.
Then I guess
So we
it's-
will begin negotiations, I believe, by March. We have to trade proposals.
I mean, this is just more of a procedural question. And I'm not going to stop. We heard the results of the budget, which we were talking about, if it's approved, if it's not approved. So, I presume, and I asked for you to clarify, this is for if the board approves the budget, if the board doesn't approve the budget. If the board doesn't approve the budget, I know this is, what happens, like, so suppose it comes back, oh, that's another question. What is the vote count? Is it just a simple majority to pass the budget? Okay. So suppose
May 6th.
it doesn't happen. Suppose something happens and the board doesn't approve the budget. So what do they do? I mean, what figure is used? What happens over straight happens?
Well, if you go back to the timeline, I mean, that's the purpose of spending these 2 months with the board, finance committee working together, the public workshops to get input from the community to somewhat get a feel of the consensus.
What I'm saying is, on May 6th, the vote comes up, and it comes up short of being passed.
Okay, if you would go back, if you look here, the board would have until May 14th to then come up with a budget that the majority of the board would approve.
Two things solve would happen. If May doesn't pass by the board, two things would happen that I think. It would go back to the committee to find out what we have to do. Okay, we do that. Second, I would think that the report that was shown tonight on what would happen, that would have to start to, and where I think that would come, we're around 2% cap. Whatever, that would be it. Now, if it left $700 and some odd $1,000 that we were sure, well, we'd have to go to that one page that was shown up there of how to make up that money. So the bank cap that Sue was talking about, that would be taken away, because that's the only thing that they wouldn't approve. You know what I'm saying? So again, the budget would be, if it was 22 million, just use a number, 22 million and 2% to that would be the budget. Okay? So if it was 31 million and 2% to it, that would be the budget. We're going and adding the bank cap because we're allowed to. And I know at one meeting it was talked about where you could take portions of that. We would still be at a point to go to that one page that said we'd have to cut this, reduce staff, that type of thing. So again, that's where we go. First we go back to the committee, okay? We'd have to sit down and see what we could do, if anything. And I would get, right, to get it passed. Then I would realize that if that didn't happen, then we'd have to go into taking back the bank cap and then start on that results of the budget disapproval.
Right, but I guess the other question I'm asking is, hypothetical, I'll use this as an example. I'm on the board and I vote, and I was voting no. Does the board member then either have the responsibility or the right to say why they voted no? Could they say, I'll just put it, I'm saying, I don't feel good for it.
Absolutely.
So that's what I'm saying though, so it gets voted, it doesn't pass, there's no majority.
Okay.
So there are at least 3 people who voted no. Do those 3 people then have a responsibility to say, well, I voted no because of the so-and-so? Does that get taken into, like,
Sure.
you know what I'm saying? It's like internal discussion.
I would think that anybody on the board that had a negative reason why they would bring it up, the committee would definitely have to take that into consideration. What I would expect, though, this is what I was being on the committee, that I would expect that board member or board members to give the committee some kind of guidance on what they feel that where they can go. If anybody can go, no, I don't like it, to please anybody in town, and come up with no solution, I would hope, because the committee, and Ms. Gershko have worked diligently on this thing here. Nobody wanted to up anybody's taxes, but if we want to keep our district functioning, I'll just go even there, just to function. This is what we have to do. So again, it would be easy for anybody to say no and come up with no resolution on how to help us to prepare our schools.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like supposed to like, no, I'm saying and then here's my worst case scenario. So what about May 7th? So suppose it's a deadline. And I'm just being very extreme, saying no one budget. Everyone says no. The people on the yes side, people say, no, we think this should stay. People on the no side say, no, we think this should be done. And by May 7th, with that deadline, there is no consensus. So what happens?
Again, the board must adopt the budget by the 14th by law. And with the quality board members that we do have here, and you've observed at each of our meetings, I am very confident that if board members had strong opposition to this budget or any concerns about this budget, they're not going to wait until May 6th to voice that. They would have voiced that long before May 6th and long before tonight even, if that was.
And so we've had board members, I'm not going to say have disapproved at all. There were concerns that they might have had, and the committee, when we met again, we went over to them concerns that the board members had, and kind of weighed out, and again, good board members have to say what's best for our children, what's best for our board member also. So just because one board member said, I don't like this and I have a concern about this, we'll take that into consideration, but we thought that it was the best interest of our children to proceed going forward with it. And again, every board member has the right to give their concerns. And I think Mr. Christopher is right. I don't think, and I would be very surprised that if somebody on May 6th comes up here and goes, well, I'm not going to say that. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody said, no, they didn't have it. But I would be very surprised if that 5 board members at least didn't go along with the budget because we sat on the committee, you know what I'm saying, we brought their concerns that some of the board members had back to the committees. We looked at certain things. Again, as Pedro said, we went to a building to see what we can do for next year because we have a lease coming up that, hey, maybe we could do something cheaper with it or whatever. So I'd be surprised if it didn't pass.
It's coming out of committee, understand too, it's coming out of committee consumption. Probably 3 yeses, definitely, right? And Mr. President has been at most of those committee meetings himself. So, stating the obvious, it's coming out of committee with 4 yeses.
Because like you were saying, you formed it. And I'm just using it because it's very hot. Table top, all day today. So I don't mean that particular agenda item was passed by the government. So that's what I'm asking. Suppose on that day, board member goes and suggests, no, oh wow, because I need to make it. But then you voted for this, and you say no objection. I'm just.
So wasn't there, and I could be totally wrong, but I being on the board the first time do we not go under the previous budget until we can get?
That's what I'm asking.
What I'm saying is if it was $31 million last year, okay, and we're asking for $32 million, do we go and the county or the state, whoever it might be, says, okay, you don't have a budget because you have 4 no votes on it, do we stick with the old budget until, I'm not sure, I'm just asking.
That's what I'm saying.
Do we stay with the old budget until we come up with a new budget that everybody agrees to, or the majority agrees to?
That's what I'm saying. So what happens in the interim between,
New budget does not go into effect until July 1st. But again, the board must adopt a budget by May 14th by law.
Okay, but
And because we've been working in committee and at meetings scenario that might occur, that even on May 6th, if we do not have a majority approval, we then have time to
8
go
days.
back and
Yeah.
alter things.
But I guess what I'm understanding is sort of saying, okay, what if, I know we're saying by law we have to vote the budget, but that, just because it's a law doesn't mean that this board has to agree. So Saul's asking, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if we didn't vote for it,
Can you file for an emergency extension?
Extension.
Yes,
I mean, there's a state.
That sounds,
There is.
that sounds.
There is
That sounds like. I'm sorry.
process that you could apply for
but the
emergency.
state,
So from having been on the board the last 2 years, this is really a board that works together really well.
Correct.
And I think we'd be completely shocked if 5 members all of a sudden decided
Right.
to vote against. And if that happened,
That's-
if that happened, we would immediately have a
Okay.
finance committee meeting. That was the first thing we would do. We obviously would listen very closely to the 5 members and their concerns, the reason why they voted no. We would take that into consideration. We would come up, we would cut what we need to cut. We would make that proposal at an emergency board meeting, which we would have to have before the 14th. And at that meeting, hopefully, we would at least be able to get that one person, if it was a 5-4 vote, that we would need. And that was,
Okay.
if that didn't happen, then obviously, I guess we could legally apply for
So
that.
then, it's like a lobby, as long as you have one.
Well, with the
Yeah,
reason,
and so,
The board
I mean,
has,
right,
the board has been working very hard.
exactly.
Thank you.
And so leading up to this point, there have been several hours of meetings between, that you didn't see, but
There
we've
have
had
been-
meetings with finance, we've had meetings with different committees as well.
There have been questions, there have
Okay,
been concerns, they've
No,
been
it's-
discussed,
that makes sense.
and everyone listens
Right.
to
Yeah, and I
their
think-
opinions.
and I think one of the
and
things-
Make sure that everybody's in agreement.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but one of the things I'm proud to be on this board because in general, we talk to each other, is that we respect. I mean, we have differences of opinion, but at the same time, we listen, and I don't see that happening, but of course, legally, we could ask for the extension if needed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jacob, give us this scholarship in Roselle Park. Praise the Lord, to voices, members of the board, Mr. President, Rodrigo, Luigi. It's a darn shame for a $32 million budget, there will be 6 people in finance. I think there's a $1.3 million increase in last year. Election cost, $13,000.
that's just showing you that
That
one
was-
year we took it out, okay? There's no more than 13,000. That was just 1 year when we went from April to November. That was just showing you that particular year we took the $13,000 cost out. That's all.
That was to have the April election.
Right.
That was charged right now.
It was a one-time cost.
So how much is it going to cost?
Nothing.
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 It's not,
Now that we've moved the election to
November.
November, we no longer have to pay the April election cost. Because now when we have the election in November, that's when all other government positions are being voted on. So there's no additional cost to the school district.
Utilities, water, electric, gas. Would you please explain if this is part of solar panels that are on high school, the savings of $133,000?
Yes. Instead of the cost increasing every year, some of the utilities have increased, but because we've been able to save on electricity with the solar panels, the total cost is actually decreased.
So you usually, $133 to offset it. It's not putting it into the budget.
It's a decrease.
It's a decrease in cost.
There's no money there.
There's no money. It's just that particular item is costing us less because of the solar panels.
Have
But what I'm understanding is that it's a very long process because there's so many districts that are trying to get, and they don't have many people to go out and do it. So we're in the process of filling out the paperwork for it because I printed it out. There's got to be about 15 to 20 pages they have to fill out and give, and that's for each building. That's not just for one district. It's for every building, and you have to write down so many things. So we're in the process of doing it. It's an ongoing process right now, but we're going to do our best to get that done.
And if you remember, we have been involved in the last 2 years in PSEG's direct install, where they've come in and evaluated our lighting fixtures, and they have replaced many of our lighting fixtures with more efficient ones. So they paid 80% of the cost, and the school district paid 20% of the cost.
Are the computers, are these special computers that Dell will make up or et cetera for schools?
Yes, we're currently piloting different computers. They do need to have certain components to be able, for the students to be able to take the test.
And Dell also generously reduce our computers.
We work with them on that also. Take work with who we buy.
Well, hopefully a grant buyer will be able to get us a technology grant that will be able to get some computers as
I
well.
don't sit in on another question. Other state aid, is that mistake, is that $1 million? Other state aid.
$1.
How much? $1.
If you recall, last year, budget time, Governor Christie put in the newspaper that many school districts received additional state aid. That additional state aid last year was $1.
We didn't miss any zeros, Jake. Sorry, we didn't miss any zeros in there.
We put it to good use. We put it to good use.
I would like us the board of members to get a 10% pay increase on what they're getting.
We were thinking about that. You can get an increase, maybe 2 to 3%.
That's fancy.
Extra surplus, $852,000 from 13 to 14, year 13 to 633,000. So we got some 220,000.
Mr. Kirsten is sick of me giving this little speech about surplus. When we proposed several times.
Okay, so we're on the same boat.
Okay. When we propose a budget, expenditures and revenues, if we do not spend every dollar, that money that we did not spend becomes surplus. School districts are allowed by law to maintain a 2% surplus. It's like having a little nest egg in case of an emergency. If you have any extra money left over that exceeds that 2%, that is then called excess surplus. That excess surplus must be returned to the taxpayers in the following year budget as part of the total revenue package. We had a rather large figure accumulated a few years ago because of the 1 year when the governor decided very late after school budgets were put together to give school districts additional state aid. school districts had the opportunity at that time to reopen their budgets and add it in, put it in the following year, or allow it to carry over into the future. Roselle Park opted to carry it over into the future. So that has been part of our budget revenue page for the last few years.
Was that $500,000?
It was slightly more than that, combination of the extra 80 and something called extraordinary that had increased.
Total debt, $685,000. We have $687,000. Is this the money, that money, carried over from the additional additions to the building?
That is correct. It's for the additions to the buildings. The bond referendum that we voted on about 10 years ago, and we'll be paying that off. The last payment is in 2025. Total amount of the bond, the money that we had to borrow and pay back, that was, the total money that we borrowed was like $9.5 million. And then we also received some state aid money for that as well. The total cost was something like $13 million.
That was the original 21.
No, it was 14. The original was 14 that was turned down, and then we cut it down to that 9 point something.
So the outstanding debt credit is always on.
We're paying it back over 25 years. The payment for next year will be $687,200, and we'll be continually paying until 2025.
That is the payment.
Yes,
Are we paying back to the state with the difference?
we're paying back on the bond. We went out to bond for that.
So we can say that's the bond.
Yeah, it's being paid back to the people who own the bonds, to whoever that might be.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing anything else, I'm going to close that public participation portion of our meeting.
Mr. President, may I ask one question?
Sure.
There was one slide, and I didn't catch it at the first budget meeting. I'm not on the committee, so forgive me if I don't understand, but I want to make sure I understand it right. It was on the expense slide, and there's a decrease, it looks like, in special ed cost outside of salaries and related special services, OT, et cetera. You know, the one we're going down 50%, and the other one we're going down 30%, right? How are we achieving that, and is there any risk of not achieving those numbers, and that's an inherent risk in the budget that we may have to overcome?
That goes back to the comment I made earlier, I just didn't make the connection, that there were certain special ed costs that we were paying contracted services for.
Okay.
For example, one of our special needs students, we had to hire and had to have their own nurse travel with them to and from their special needs school every day. So we were paying a nursing service close to $100,000 a year for that nurse. We were also paying for behaviorists we decided that we would get more hours of service if we employed our own people. So we have hired a part-time physical therapist, we've hired a behaviorist. So that's part of the reason why salaries have gone up, and the reason why those two special ed costs have decreased.
Okay. So if I'm understanding, there's negligible risk there that because we kind of mitigated it
Yes.
by hiring. Okay. I saw those numbers, I didn't see it the first go around here.
Yeah, well, we always,
Yeah, I'm trying to
we
understand.
always check all avenues of what will give us the best service for our dollars. What will do best for our children is our first priority.
Thank you for that.
Any comments, questions?
Seeing that there's none, I'll ask for a motion.
So moved.